What are some of the iconic Dungeons & Dragons monsters that you can face during your adventuring career? That's what we're going to explore in this vlog within the framework I had posted up a couple of days ago. We were talking about beholders, kind of some tactica and some points, both as a player and as a dungeon master. And the beholder is really part of D&D mythology. It's an iconic monster that at some point, win or lose, hopefully win, can always resurrect you unless you get totally disintegrated. And then at that point, I'm not wasting a wish spell on you. And if I had access to a wish spell, we wouldn't be fighting that beholder in the first place. We'd be well beyond any eye tyrants and things like that. But I shared part of the local gaming culture that I'm a part of. Here in New York, I'm a part of a group with about 3 or 4 DMs, 5 dungeon masters. We play regular games and players bounce around from our games. And what we have is a card, a physical card listing 12 iconic D&D monsters. And as a player, when you defeat one of these monsters in the various adventures, could be individually or could be part of the party. You just have to be present when the final blow is delivered. You get to literally punch a hole in your card. When you make it halfway through, you get acknowledged with, we have this kind of card stock D&D trophy, pyramid trophy that we print out on card stock. You cut it out, you fold the card stock, and it's kind of this monument to being halfway there. And should you defeat all the monsters, then you get this D20 type pin. And it's a great way to say in your D&D career, you, through a little bit of luck, through some definite tactica and maybe being in the right place at the right time, have defeated these monsters. You have achieved a massive milestone in your adventure. And we have a lot of fun doing that and playing that. And it doesn't have to be all with the same character. It can be played over multiple characters, but it's you as a player as you progress. And within that framework, I want to always encourage, if you're part of a gaming group or a part of a network of D&D, and that network locally could be 2 players, could be 5 players, could be 3 players, whatever it's going to be, what are some of those things that you can create real time, that you can physically create to help support your community and help support the D&D experience and acknowledge the creativity and ingenuity of players, but also dungeon masters? And this is one of the ways that we do it. So within that framework, in the comments, the question was, well, Fritz, you can't drop that. What's the monsters? Like, where am I on the checklist? So I wanted to jump in and check off my monsters, the monsters that we use in this kind of tabletop project. Now, in exploring that, we want it to be a mix of iconic, mid-tier, high-tier, and legendary monsters. You're not getting a punch-out for just beating on some skeletons and zombies, okay? These are things where there is significant risk and reward, and you have to be at a mid to higher character level, meaning you've already survived a couple of adventures. You've already been on a couple of quests. You're playing your character. You've got a little bit of experience. You've also got a little bit of something to lose. Something to lose. You've invested a number of games to play, and I say lose in a positive way. You're risking your character's life to achieve these goals. So that was the criteria where, yes, it is weighted more on the mid to high end because these are achievements that we are looking to unlock. Second to that was looking across the D&D mythology and picking monsters that are not only iconic to D&D, but perhaps just native to the D&D mythology, although some of these are more generic and are present in other systems, but they're a cornerstone to D&D, pulling those in. The final piece that we were looking at, just kind of sharing with you behind the scenes, the engine running, was monsters that if you play a variety of adventures, over the course of those, you are going to encounter these at some point. Some of us play and run entirely homebrew campaigns. I run my own campaign, but I also like to run a lot of the classical D&D modules, whether they've been upgraded for D&D Modern or playing Advanced Dungeons & Dragons. We wanted to pull monsters that were not focused on one specific adventure set that if you play a variety of adventures over the course of your D&D career, you will face these monsters. Okay, within that framework, we're jumping in. First, the gelatinous cube. I mean, this is a classic D&D monster, right? You're navigating through the dungeon. You fight it. It's blocking your path. You don't want to get paralyzed. You don't want to get partially digested. You probably could go around the other way, but then you look in there and you're like, well, there's a couple of coins and a gem or two and some wands and a sword. Must be a magic sword. So this kind of classic ooze slime incarnation. Plus, we've got a couple of cool miniatures for it as it moves down the Dwarven Forge hallway. This is one of the first kind of iconic dungeon dwellers. Can you face it? Can you fight it? And this is kind of a lower tier monster. And I should say, while these are in no specific order, you can encounter them at any point. It's not like you have to do them in certain orders. The next, a red dragon. A red dragon. A classic D&D monster. It's dungeons and it's dragons. At some point, you're going to fight a dragon. And in classic D&D, there's the various ranks of dragons and certainly the age of the dragon. But a mid-size red dragon, they're the more powerful. And it's not just for Kryn. They're the more powerful dragons to encounter. You've kind of reached an important D&D milestone when you faced a mid-age red dragon. An ancient red dragon would count also if you happen to survive that. But checking off a red dragon, absolutely. A Lich. You know, sooner or later, a Lich is going to be involved. You got some interesting synergy there in D&D. Liches are no baby cakes. They've got massive control of magic. They've got massive control of just being undead, various resistances and things like that. They've been around for a long time, so there's going to be minions. There's going to be traps. There's going to be treasures. You don't just walk in and fight a Lich. And then there's also the duality of you must destroy the Lich with a phylactery or a way to regenerate. This is a potent encounter. Very potent. The Beholder is next. This is kind of classic D&D, right? Facing an eye tyrant. And a tyrant of the deep does not count. It's got to be a Beholder proper. You've got eye stalks that are going to disintegrate you, set you on fire, paralyze you. You've got a magnetic cone, anti-magic cone. You've got various bites and attacks, not to mention the intelligence of a Beholder is going to have minions and yes, I should disintegrate the mage first, paralyze the warrior, and then chomp on this character. Fighting a Beholder is classic in D&D. A vampire. Now, vampires are not unique to D&D, certainly. They're a cornerstone, not only with Curse, which is, I think, the absolute voted number one module ever. And in D&D 5 here, D&D Modern, the remake of that, I have to say, is fantastic. I've run it about 4 times. Every time it plays out a little bit differently. So from the perspective of a dungeon master, it's a real treat. It's a real excitement to run to see how players go through it compared to the last group or previous groups. But from that perspective, vampires are very, very powerful. Very powerful, and of course, a command of magic. Can't play D&D without facing a vampire and beating a vampire at some point. A rust monster. A rust monster, they're a lot of fun at the lower levels, and we're kind of switching back to dungeons. A fighter in plate mail. Now, plate mail in D&D costs a lot of money. Plate mail in AD&D, full plate, couple of 1,000 gold pieces. That is a significant investment. You're sitting there in your full plate. You've just gotten your armor class down into negative numbers, right? Thaco doesn't matter. You're going to have to roll legendary to hit me. Rust monster appears, especially if it gets a surprise round. That's suddenly really interesting because the fighters, the clerics, the heavily armored warriors of the party, they don't want anything to do with this type of monster, but it's kind of a unique and fun D&D monster. So you beat that rust monster. Storm giants. Giants in general, storm giant. Now, there are a number of prominent D&D adventures that feature giants. And a Storm Giant is up there literally in the clouds, the most powerful. Massive hit points, massive damage dealing strikes, the ability to call down lightning strikes that are just going to absolutely blast you. On top of the reach and attack value, you've got to beat that Storm Giant. So the Storm Giant is on the card. We're about halfway through. Umber Hulk. Umber Hulks are kind of interesting. You know, they can do a lot of damage. They're present not only in dungeon adventures, kind of burrowing and breaking through, but also wilderness adventures. And even with the challenge rating, I think they do a lot of damage quicker than you think. So as a party, you have to be really, really focused on beating this. But at the same time, if you put yourself out there, it could do a lot of damage. So facing an Umber Hulk. A Basilisk. Basilisk is interesting because across all the editions of D&D, when you encounter these, and it could be dungeon, it could be wilderness, turning to stone. We're not just talking paralysis where it's like, okay, look, I got paralyzed because I failed my save. Okay, I'll be back in like, D4 +1 rounds. And as long as we don't get party killed, it's all good from that perspective. But the possibility of being turned to stone, that's not a Medusa, that's something interesting to navigate. We're trying to pull in different monsters where it's not just about the alpha, you beating on this stat block. They've got some magic abilities. They've got some other abilities. They've got Dragon Fire. They've got Paralysis. They've got Level Drain. They've got Turn You to Stone. And yes, the party just has to beat it. So technically, if you're facing a Basilisk and you get turned to stone, but the party defeats it, then you get that punch out. You get that check on your card. Hopefully, they'll pay the gold or they'll turn you from stone to flesh and get you back in the game. But you just have to beat it for it to count. A Mindflare. A Mindflare, that's a classic D&D monster. If you're journeying into the Underdark, at some point you're going to face a Mindflare. And not only, it's interesting the different editions. Like, you don't want to let a Mindflare anywhere near you, those physical attacks. It will kill you very, very fast. Likewise, with its command of magic, I want to kind of stay away from a Mindflare, but then I want to get close because you want to beat on a mage. And in D&D Modern here, this is a monster that has gotten, it's still a challenge, absolutely. But it's gotten a little bit easier, or a lot easier, through each edition as the rules have been streamlined with options and stat blocks. While a Mindflare is still more potent and powerful, if we look at a Mindflare from Advanced Dungeons & Dragons where psionics are involved, the psionic ability is absolutely crazy. But in any edition, a Mindflare is iconic in the Underdark, and you've got to find it, face it, and beat it. The last two. Going through this checklist in your D&D career could be a couple of months, could be a couple of years, could be at this point almost a lifetime. How many of these monsters have you faced? And I'm going to actually drop in the comments. I'm going to pin to the first post here the monsters in the list so you can kind of go through and check these off. A Displacer Beast. Displacer Beast could be a little bit challenging at the lower to mid levels. It's an iconic D&D monster. It's also kind of fun, and it's unique, and it's got some special abilities that, yes, it hits hard, but the displacement aspect and how it moves and being able to see it and swinging and missing and making sure you hit the right one, that's got an interesting encounter to it. That's going to call up some different character abilities and some different synergies that you're going to have to work together with. The last on the list, the Owlbear. The Owlbear. At the lower levels, an Owlbear is really, really tough to beat. It takes a lot of damage. It can deal a lot of damage. It has better than average hit points. And it's kind of a unique monster to the D&D mythology. So within that framework, these are the classic D&D monsters that we've picked that you need to work your way through as a player. You hit the midway point, you get that honorary kind of printout trophy, you make it to the end, you join the club, you get your D20 pin that you can proudly wear. Beyond that, we have about, I'm trying to think, I'd have to go and look, out of about 70 or 80, about 80 players have participated in this, that have regularly played in this. And I think we have about 20 of them that have achieved this, these rewards, these unlocks, these achievements. So at some point we'll have to add like a second tier, or maybe a different layer over on achievements. Maybe if you play X number of characters and make it to certain levels. I'm always open to new ideas, but it's been a lot of fun with our gaming group, and it's been a great way to encourage players within our circle to play different adventures, to experience different dungeon masters, and to acknowledge them, to acknowledge you in the D&D community as achieving these various explorations and unlocks.